Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Matt. It's good to see some old friends and hopefully making many new friends here. Looking forward to talking with all of you after that. Well, since we don't have much time, I'm going to start. Technology and citizen engagement, friend or foe? So, I mean, I've been using this title for many presentations, but it changes all the time in case you've seen it somewhere else. Because lots of the excitement that comes around participation or new avenues for participation comes from technology many times, right? So as Elaine mentioned earlier, or as the bank, in which we have a digital engagement unit working precisely with that. But first, a bit of historical perspective. Does anybody know what that is? Raise your hands. Okay, so this is called the Napoleonic telegraph or the optical semaphore. So it was invented by Claude Chappe, an engineer, right after the French Revolution. And basically what it did is that what you see on top is like arms that they move, and depending on how they position, they send a message. Was the first time, actually, that a message could travel faster than horses. Was information and communication technologies at its best with code. So I'm not going to go, but it didn't go unnoticed by Democrats of their time. I'm going to jump this first quote, but this is from Alexander van der Monde, mathematician, great intellectual of the time, who was also a member of the French Academy of Sciences. And he says, like, the invention of the telegraph is a new factor that Rousseau did not include in his calculations. Dumb Rousseau. It can be used to speak at great distances as fluently and as distinctly as in a room. There is no reason why it would not be possible for all of the citizens of France to communicate their will within a rather short of time in such a way that this communication might be considered instantaneous. Not only that, right? Sounds like a coincidence? Now, there was a code, but this code to transfer, because of war, it was secret. So there was a movement of these intellectuals at this time that they would say, we just need to make the code open and democracy will flourish. So we had the first civic tech movement and open source movement at the same time. Now, sad story at the end. It wasn't used for many things apart from wars. And a friend of mine the other day, he said, well, probably they used it for porn because that's what happens with technology. But no, but the time that, because they used to measure the speed to which it would travel, the time that it went fastest, which was 500 kilometers an hour, was to announce the birth of the son of Napoleon, which is as close as you get to porn in that time. So now, moving to our times, technology, internet, mobile technology, and so on. Technology and participation, friend or foe. So one of the things that really excites us about technology, what does it do? It's that basically it lowers the transaction costs for people to participate, right? So now we can participate from anywhere, we can deliberate online whenever it's convenient and whatever time it is convenient for us. What does the evidence tell us, right? So one of the things that we see in the countries, for instance, that adopted electronic voting, which are two that have been done it systematically and studied, which is Estonia and Switzerland, we see actually very, very marginal increases in turnout. The estimated turnout in Estonia, where it does it more and more, is about 2.5% increase in turnout. So that lowering those transaction costs doesn't seem to make that much difference. For electoral processes, may be different for participatory processes. But then a question, as Joseph said earlier when he was doing the presentation, is who participates? So we looked at the Rio Grande do Sul state participatory budgeting, where people participate both offline and online. It is arguably the largest participatory budgeting process in the world. Every year, 1.3 million people participate either online or offline on the allocation of the state budget. And here we're looking, I'm sorry, it's very small. We're looking at what are the predictors for being an online voter as opposed to an offline voter. First factor, use of social networks, no news. Second factor, being male. Third factor, high income. Fourth factor, high education. I think you're getting the message. Now, maybe this is just a state in Rio Grande do Sul and so on. And as Helene said earlier, we need to look at also transnational democracy. So we've been looking at change.org. We downloaded about 4 million signatures from change.org, and we've been looking at the gender of the participants. You see here on the left side, these are the countries, a few of the countries that are plotted here, like US, for instance, is the first one, where you see percentage of male participation being higher than male participation compared to offline petitions, correct? So you see that in the United States, it creates great inclusion of women. Women participate more on change.org in the US. But here, important distinction by Met, thin and thick participation. Women are more likely to sign petitions, but men are more likely to initiate petitions. But I'm going to leave from that. But when we look internationally across the 132 countries, what we see is that there's a great gender divide, which is not only linked to participation, offline patterns of participation, but it's also linked, and it's above all, linked to unequal access to technologies. Access to technology is unequal. Now, let's forget that problem. Supposing people participating, do governments respond, right? So with Jonathan Fox from American University, we did a case study of 23 cases around the world, looking at cases of civic technology, seeing do government respond when people participate. Sorry, but here we're looking at 23 cases. You might say it's not a lot, but actually when you try to look at data on responsiveness from civic tech initiatives, it's almost 0 cases that you find. So we had to spend lots of time to find just 23 cases. And we're the World Bank, we had resources to look for cases, and we could find only 23. So what did we find? Well, civic technology seems great when governments are already willing to respond. Right? It makes much easier for them, one, to get access to distributed intelligence and also to internally manage their capacity to respond. But as we conclude, most of the civic technologies, most of them, we're saying, not all, have yet to influence the willingness of governments to do so. But now, let's forget this problem as well and suppose that governments are responding. When governments respond, and this is a question that we don't see very often, who do they respond to? So again, going transnational, on our mapping, this is our mapping of change.org across countries, and here you're just having the flux of change.org petition signatures. What you'll find is actually online petitioning is much more transnational than you would expect. So the United States, for instance, which is at the center not because of I'm trying to please you guys here, but it's at the center because it receives an enormous amount of signatures. And what do we find? Actually, depends on the regime, depends on who they respond to. So United States, for instance, which is a democracy, and every other democratic regime, they tend to respond only to their domestic audiences. When you go to an authoritarian regime, which if the guy bothers too much, you can send him to jail or just kill him, actually they respond to none of those, but they tend much more to respond to external audiences. I hope this won't become the case in the United States. But, well, maybe you're looking here, well, this matters, this is interesting. How many of you know the website Fix My Street? Raise your hands. Okay, it's a kind of like a cyclic fix. You take a picture, you do a pothole, and so on. So we looked at the data from Fix My Street in the UK, where presumably you have internet access and everything, and we tried to look at what are the predictors for government response across every city council in the UK. So here we have a sample of about 380,000 reports. We control for the type of reports, of course, because some people can report potholes, other people graffiti, and so on. But when we look at the messages, what are the things that we find on responsiveness? First of all, if you say please, you increase the odds of having your problem fixed, which is very British, of course. Second one, if you add a photo, you increase your odds. But sadly, if you sign your name as a male, controlling for all other things, government is more likely to respond to you. This is what I call, in civic technology, the polite male with a camera. So, now, to finish, when we think of civic technology, we need to think of technological artifact and its enactment. So, first, technological access and capabilities are unevenly distributed. We cannot forget that. This is why we need to think also of offline participation, but also of going beyond self-selection, because everything in civic tech, crowdsourcing is self-selection. Need to move beyond that. Second one, listening or putting tools for listening has never been so easy. Responding or willing to respond is as hard as ever, correct? Finally, biases are present not just in participants' profile, but also in government's response. So as Francis said earlier, it is the theory that decides what we look at or what we observe. I would say that we need to observe these things if we're thinking about technology, because otherwise our fate will not be different of that of the Napoleonic telegraph. Thank you very much.